My name is Andrea Pennington. I'm an integrative physician, acupuncturist, best-selling author, and international speaker. I help doctors, therapists, coaches, speakers, and authors share their message with the world in the areas of resilience, trauma healing, and self-love. It's all part of my mission to elevate the level of consciousness in our world. After living for years, hiding depression and anxiety, I know how isolating and sickening it feels to be trapped, not living life aligned with your authentic self. As I've shared in my books and TED Talks, music saved my life and set me free from depression. And through a near-death experience, I reconnected with my soul and got a whole new vision to live for. Now, I combine my media communication experience with my professional expertise in meditation, neurofeedback, and holistic healing on stages, TV shows, and podcasts, in boardrooms and retreat centers around the world. My books, life writing programs, and brand mentoring academy are all designed to empower you to transform, heal, and thrive in business and in life. Hello, beautiful soul. Are you feeling the pressure or fear mounting as people leave lockdown and return to their existing life outside? Well, if you're afraid that our world is really going to a 5G hell in a handbasket, this show is for you. There is a lot of fear and negativity floating around now, but today I want to help you manage that by tuning in to the science of positivity with an interview with Loretta Breuning, who will help us stop negative thought patterns by changing our brain chemistry. Of course, it would be easy to become cynical and even feel hopeless as the world appears to be crumbling under an evil power regime. And you may even wonder, is it even realistic to be positive, optimistic, or hopeful? Well, being negative, pessimistic, or cynical is not likely to change the situation. It's more likely to negatively impact your physical health, emotional well-being, and your relationships, including with your children. Now, of course, if you are already tuned in to your heart and soul, you may see this as a global awakening, the evolution into a unity consciousness, which means you may be truly positive right now. But if you're struggling or know someone who is, please share this video. This video will help start a simple process of rewiring your brain and kickstarting positivity circuits by altering your own brain chemistry in just a few minutes each day. Empowering, isn't it? So today's conversation is with Loretta Breuning, PhD. She's founder of the Inner Mammal Institute and author of Habits of a Happy Brain, Retrain Your Brain to Boost Your Serotonin, Dopamine, Oxytocin, and Endorphin Levels. As professor of management at California State University and as a parent, Loretta lost faith in prevailing views of human motivation. Her search for answers led to studies of the brain chemistry that we share with earlier mammals. And suddenly, everything made sense, and she began creating resources to help people manage their inner mammal. The Inner Mammal Institute offers videos, books, podcasts, multimedia, and a training program to help you make peace with your inner mammal. Dr. Breuning's latest book is Tame Your Anxiety, Rewiring Your Brain for Happiness. But today, we are going to be talking about the science of positivity. I am so excited to welcome you, Loretta Breuning. Thank you so much for being here with me for Conscious Evolution.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Well, I have so enjoyed watching your videos. I've actually discovered you a couple of years ago, and I love the fun and quirky way that you help people understand their brain chemistry and brain circuitry.
Sorry, I'm trying to be in the middle there. Okay. Hi, thank you so much.
So I love what you write in the science of positivity. What you're telling us, especially relevant for us today, is that positivity doesn't really mean that we're going to be looking at the world through rose-colored glasses all of the time, ignoring reality. It's more about adjusting the brain's natural tendency to ignore the positives. Because as you write, negativity actually feels good in a weird way to the mammal brain. So can you just explain a bit about how we have inherited a brain that's inclined to go negative? Let's start there.
Sure. Well, our ancestors lived in a very threatening world and they risked starving all the time. So they were always focused on meeting their needs. And we've inherited a brain that rewards you with a good feeling when you take a step toward meeting your needs, and then a bad feeling when you see a threat or obstacle. So in today's world, we meet our needs so easily in the sense that our belly is full, so we don't have like the joy of finding our next meal. So we have to work a little harder at um, appreciating the rewards we have. And then we don't have threats in the sense of something that's going to kill you immediately. So an obstacle to meeting your needs gets like elevated. It activates your whole threat system that evolved for real immediate threats. So that's why people can believe they're in a threat when they're not.
Right. So let's talk about just very quickly, don't worry, you guys, it's not going to be long, but let's give a little bit of an anatomy lesson. What parts of our brain are similar to our reptilian friends?
Sure. So probably people have heard about the reptile brain, and maybe you've heard of the limbic system. So you've heard of probably the amygdala, hippocampus, hypothalamus, and this is not about specific parts, but all those parts together. Mammals have them. All mammals have them. Reptiles, like just a tiny bit. So mammals have actually social bonds that reptiles don't have. And mammals are constantly making decisions. Like if I see a banana, should I go for it or not? And if I see a banana in the distance, should I go for that or should I stick with the group? So any decision that you're making, that you're sort of weighing these things, the animal part of your brain is making that decision.
Got it. And part of what I think is really wonderful about the way you write is it's very simple. I've actually read this book with my 14-year-old daughter,
Oh,
and
good.
she was like, "This makes so much sense."
Oh, yeah. Good, good.
Like, especially as we understand why social anxiety comes about when we realize, wait a minute,
Yes,
there's no real threat to my true survival, and yet I'm feeling that trigger like
exactly.
as if it
Exactly.
really is.
So that survival threat feeling is a chemical called cortisol, and it does its job very well. So everyone has heard that in the state of nature, that it's designed to tell an animal when its survival is threatened, and that means a couple of things. One is it commands your attention, so it's hard to focus on anything else. So the gazelle would rather be eating, but instead it focuses on the potential threat, and then it arouses your energy so that in the state of nature you could run. And that's why you feel it in your body as well as your brain.
So if we kind of have this understanding of our mammalian brain, we have our own inner mammal, as you call it. Um, what we're facing today, as we're coming out of, most people are kind of coming out of the pandemic. Here in France, we're now in week 2 of people being able to go back to work and school in limited measure. Um, I'm still kind of staying at home, just watching. But what we're seeing is that yes, there has been fear throughout the entire pandemic, the whole uncertainty. But now that people have seen so many different conspiracy theories out there, there's also a lot of cynicism, which is something that you write about. Can you help us distinguish between like pessimism and cynicism, and is it ever healthy to be cynical?
So, first, in terms of pessimism and optimism, so our brains are wired from experience. So, we're born with billions of neurons, but no connections between them. So, our connections build from everything we experience, which is just a random collection that each of us ends up with. And anything that triggered your cortisol in your past built your cortisol pathway. So, even in a pandemic, when we're all experiencing the same thing, you can notice that One person is worried about something that just happens to match their fears when they were young, and another person is worried about something else that just happens to match. And now when that stay at home is decreasing, then people are going back to their fears of what their fear was being out in the world. So it's our old cortisol pathways that trigger this. Now, when you are looking at the world through the lens of your old cortisol pathways, you you don't consciously intend to do that, but when your brain takes in information from the outside world, it triggers it's more inputs than you can process. So we focus on what's relevant, and whatever was wired in your past, those neural pathways, the electricity just flows effortlessly. And that effortless flow, it feels true because you didn't try to think it. So you just think, well, that must be true. Now, cynicism. So first, we have all this information we're trying to process, but we're really trying to avoid threats and get rewards. So how do you get rewards? Social bonding is what we focus on when our other needs are met. And social importance is also what we focus on. They're two different things, and we want both, and it's natural to want both, and everyone wants both. So how do you get social importance and social bonding? Well, cynicism is a very popular way to do it. So mammals bond when there's a threat. So the more the threat, the more they bond. The less the threat, the more they go off to greener pasture. So if you observe the social dynamics around you, you'll see that being cynical in some way helps a person meet their social needs. And when that works, the happy chemicals wire your brain, and your brain says, wow, that feels good, I'm going to do it again.
That is so interesting because if we're getting sort of a happy chemical hit, like it's okay to be cynical, it's going to keep reinforcing it. Whereas we really
Exactly.
want people to shift. Well, that's why you're here today. But before we get into what we can do right now to kickstart our own positivity circuits, I want to go back to something that you just mentioned. You talked about how in childhood we have these pathways, and these pathways end up getting kind of grooved into the brain because during childhood, in particular, the first 7 years of life, and then again at puberty, we have myelin, this fancy coating on our brain that makes it like a superhighway. So
Yes.
one of the things that I am specially trained in is trauma. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, what I have seen in my professional career is that there is a habit of searching for threats that began in
Yes.
childhood for many of my clients. They perceived some sort of true survival threat, in many cases, unfortunately, but that persists into adulthood. And then they end up disappointed, or they are always anticipating something bad happening. And as you write, sometimes that causes us to overlook how we could take care of our own needs. Instead, we're looking reflexively out there. So, how can people who may have experienced some adverse childhood experience, trauma, abuse, abandonment, how would you advise them, since they already have those grooves of negativity?
So, first, the simple solution is always that you have billions of extra neurons available to build new pathways with. And the solution is always to build a new pathway. And the way to do that is always to feed your brain a new experience repeatedly, because repetition is what builds the new pathway. So, the challenge is, well, how am I going to feed my brain a new experience when I still have the old pathways? And it doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel real. So the answer is you have to motivate yourself in some other way. So I've been involved in some animal training experience. So the simple example that everyone knows is like, or like with a child, give it a cookie each time you do it. So let's say that each time you consciously plan a positive way to think about something that you were already worried with. So you have to plan it because it's not going to feel natural at first. Then you reward it. So let's just say you give yourself a cookie each time. And like many people think, oh, well, I should give myself some healthy food, but that's a separate goal. So if you're trying to rewire your emotions, you want to train your brain to feel good. So you want to be able to think about a social interaction and then feel good about it rather than automatically feel bad about it. Now, first, it starts with forgiving yourself that you're having this old response because it's a real physical pathway. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with the world. It's a new chemical in an old pathway, so it feels like it's happening right now, but you are activating it, and when you take responsibility for it, it's easier to redirect. And one other thing that is so frustrating, many times when a person tries to have a positive thought, they have all these negative associations with positive thoughts. And I'll just give you the one from my childhood was like, you're not doing your share. Like if you're happy and everyone around you is miserable, you're not carrying the weight. And you must be, taking your happiness from them. And this is such a, right? And so that is such a widely spread cultural mindset. And you have to say well, you don't have to, but I decided to say to myself, I would rather be happy even if it makes them mad at me. And if they are mad at me, that's something they're creating that I don't have to carry with me.
Which takes some practice.
Practice, exactly. That's all it takes is practice.
Yeah.
And it took me a while. And I worked on practicing in terms of making it feel good rather than, what we're tempted to do is, people could spend all day weighing the pros and cons and debating with them in your head. And then you're just going to make yourself miserable. So your goal is to create a positive pathway.
Mm-hmm. So Sherry Britt has written in, and she says that this is interesting because I've found that I must distance myself from specific people because of the way that they're processing all of this information. So that's a kind of the healthy avoidant way, right?
Yes, I think so. Yes, and I'm doing the same thing. Um, there are people who it's amazing how people take it in different ways. And you could say, well, they have their reasons for that. But you are not obligated to share in someone else's misery. And if they think you're obligated to do it and they won't give you permission to go off and have a good life, you're still not obligated.
Yeah, ultimately, we've got to take responsibility for our lives and let go of the codependent tendency to try to manage yourself and everyone else. So, what you're talking about, and we'll get to the specific practice that you recommend about building a positivity habit in a bit, but
Mhm.
what you're talking about with this deliberate focus, it's kind of like the positive psychology world where they talk about building up psychological capital so that you become more resilient. And like the work of Fred Luffens, which says that psychological capital is made up of hope and efficacy and resilience and optimism, and that one of the ways that we build up the H, it spells out hero, the H or hope is about agency. So I'd love it if we could talk a little bit about, or we could talk a lot about it, because you write extensively about it. But this whole idea of personal agency, for me, this is one of the things I'm screaming from the rooftops in every podcast I'm on. And I love the way you describe it. So let's start there.
Thank you so much. First, what you reminded me was I always go back to the animal example, the animal mindset. So if you're a gazelle and you smell a lion, if you just focus on the lion, you're going to get eaten. So the gazelle is focused on the path in front of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a gazelle cannot say, you better get rid of all those lions. I'm not going out until you get rid of the lions. So it has no choice but to live in a world of threat. And how does it manage is by trust in its own skills. So it doesn't question, oh, do you think I can have the strength to escape that lion? It just does it. It focuses on the path and it puts one foot in front of another. And that's what our animal brain can do. Focus on the path, put one foot in front of another. It's the human cortex on top of that that is capable of analyzing. And we all know this concept of overanalyzing. But instead, you could say that I'm analyzing usefully, which is like which path is the best, what's the best way to invest my energy in the next step. So your cortex is there to analyze, to help your mammal brain take the step and focus on the reward and being safe and trusting your own skills. But the in the book, when I talk about personal agency, I use the example just because I know it's hard for people to believe in their own agency when there's so much talk about society did it to you and it's society's fault. People are trained to blame society. So I think of if you watch a movie about a Hollywood movie star and they have an agent and everything is about their agent and they think their agent will fix everything. And so imagine that you're a big movie star and you have an agent and every time you have a frustration, you call your agent, but they mess up. And the Hollywood agent, they're always mad at their agent. So now you fire your agent and you get a new one, and then you fire them and you get a new one, and problems still happen. And then finally you realize that you are your own agent. And so that's the idea. So now you don't have to wait until you become a big star. You are your own agent today, and you can make better decisions than waiting around for someone who knows better than you.
So you touched on what we see a lot of in our community is this analysis paralysis. But if we really did want to use our brain and wisely and actually prime it to have that good feeling, what you talk about in the book is if we just make one step, we don't have to have the entire plan figured out. And one of our coaches, Malin Headland, says, even if you're taking ant steps, doesn't have to be baby steps, it can be an ant step. Because as you say, just making a plan to take that first step, you're going to get a little burst of dopamine, which makes you feel good.
Not to make the plan, but to actually take the step.
Okay.
So, yeah, so you want to take a step, you get a little bit of a good feeling, and then you make a commitment to yourself to take the next step at a specific time. And a funniest example, my dentist was trying to get me to floss. And I thought flossing sounded horrible. And he made me promise to floss one tooth. And so I guess you could say that's the social shaming approach because I was too embarrassed to not agree. And then once I did it, then once I agreed to him, then it's the idea of honoring a commitment to yourself. If you say, if I can't honor a commitment to myself, what am I? So you can practice honoring commitments to yourself, but make the commitment small enough that you know you can do it. And then it's the repetition of the small steps. And remember that that's the job our brain evolved for. So our ancestors were constantly looking for food in order to avoid starving. So it's not like they had some like, oh, we need to find some permanent source of food so our lives are easy every minute. No, our brain evolved to motivate, to make you feel good with each step.
Which is so important for us because I do think we tend to want to have everything figured out. Like we want that security. And if we would at least just take advantage of the wiring we have to take these steps, we will
Yes.
eventually get there. And as you write in the book, it's about persistence and perseverance.
Yes, exactly. And the idea that I want to plan before I start. So part of that is that my husband is big on this. Whenever something goes wrong, he blames the plan. So, so, and then often you could blame the plan on someone else. So that's part of it. But another thing is when you have a goal, it feels good. So
Mm.
there's nothing wrong with that. So having a goal stimulates dopamine, but actually what stimulates the dopamine is the perception that you're getting closer to the goal. So if you make impossible goals and then don't get closer, you're not going to feel good. So making realistic goals and then moving toward them is what stimulates dopamine, and that's what we call joy or excitement.
Nice. So I think it would be a matter of you can still have a big, long range, fabulous goal, but just giving yourself little milestones that you can look forward to that are achievable and realistic.
Yes. And the interesting thing is that if you have this long range fabulous goal, that once you get there, the dopamine stops. That's how our brain is designed to work. Because, like, if our ancestors were trying to kill a bison, and then once they kill the bison, the dopamine stopped because it already did its job. And then they would get excited when they saw a fruit tree. So each goal stimulates dopamine and then it stops. So we're designed to have ups and downs. And so there's no solution to that except self acceptance.
Yeah. So I'd love to move to another area of acceptance that is sometimes difficult, especially what we're dealing with today. So, for example, many people are quite frustrated with the government. They've heard things about 5G and what it might potentially do to you, and forced vaccinations and all of these sorts of things. So it's created a sense of oppositionalism, and some of it rightly so. I mean, we feel very threatened that some of our civil liberties are being taken away. But what you write in the book is that we need to really to switch from that negativity vibe into positivity. We need to focus on building rather than opposing. So what would you say right now, if we do feel like we are helpless? How can we use our brain chemistry to build something in the face of this corona pandemic?
Sure. So, one thing I do is I read a lot of biographies because when I read about stories of people in the past, I realize that stuff has always been going on and people have always been reacting to it and they've always been frustrated about it. So, that's one whole thing, just to accept that this is like not the crisis point in history. It just feels that way to your brain because, from the perspective of your survival, it is. And that's what the brain focuses on. The other thing is, I forgot. Oh, about the, so when you focus on what you have control over, then you have the potential to get rewards, and that makes you feel good. If you focus on things you can't control, then you feel bad. So, why do people do that so much? They do it because they listen to the news or they listen to other people that they have feelings of attachment toward, and they hear this repeated so much that that builds a pathway and it feels as natural as speaking your native language. So when you are doing that, it has some short run rewards, like you feel bonded and protected by other people who have this negative mindset. And it frees you from that threat of having to go out and take steps towards your own rewards. So it's understanding that this is just a set of neural pathways, and that's why it feels natural to you. But you can build new pathways, and then you could be happy all the time if you do that. So, in a way, you're choosing the security of the mindset you have, and then you see that you don't have as much as you want, so you need to blame it on something. So that's part of it.
So we just need to focus on what we have control over. So
Yes,
our own internal household, our own internal thought processes, and focus
yes.
on building instead of thinking of let's go back to what was, let's build something for our future.
Well, and also what was, people were upset then too. People are always upset about something. And the simple reason is that we are mortal and we're going to die. And our brain is designed to fear threats. And an animal doesn't know it's going to die because animals don't think about the future and they don't think about abstractions. So when you plug a big human cortex into an animal brain, you get a brain that terrorizes itself. And how can we calm that fear? The simple solution, well, one is just not to focus on that all the time. But what do you focus on instead is your legacy. And that's what calms people. And for most of human history, your legacy was your grandchildren. And that happened without effort because as soon as people had sex, they got pregnant and then they watched, if they lived long enough, they watched their grandchildren repeating their own traditions. And that gave them a sense of continuity. And that's what people are longing for. And you could either create some kind of, like I say, if you're a carpenter and you build a chair, that chair will survive. So anything you build that will survive relaxes you a little. And instead, people are obsessing over potential diseases that they can get, which was happening before this situation.
Exactly. So one of the other things that you write about is having realistic expectations, and you've said that the inner mammal gets triggered. We're totally ruled by our brain chemistry, but our instincts are not really realistic. I mean, we talked about this with social stuff. You see somebody supposedly living a fabulous life on Instagram or Facebook, and suddenly you feel smaller than or less than.
Mm.
So I'd love it if we could talk a little bit about the idea of realistic expectations.
Great. So, first, the very concept of expectations is inevitable because it's a physical pathway. Like when you read, your brain generates expectations about what the next word will be. That's why, if it's a typo, that's how you know it's a typo, because it's like, oh, wait, that's not what I expected. So, the brain is always focused on what comes next. So, where do your expectations come from? They come from past experience. So if your experience was focused on some kind of, let's just use a common example of dreaming of being a rock star, then you are having a disappointment in regard to that expectation. And disappointment, always going back to the animal, is if you're a lion chasing a gazelle and the gazelle gets away, that's actually a survival threat because from those nature videos that the lion hasn't eaten for a week, and if it never catches anything, they do starve to death. So you have equipment that allows you to think that a disappointment is a survival threat. So that's why you will go there unless you keep yourself on the path toward rewards. So that's one thing. But the other whole big thing that we haven't talked about is social comparison. So social comparison is, again, it's natural. Animals do it constantly. And your brain is doing it constantly because that's what the mammal brain does. So mammals live in groups, and there are always smaller individuals and weaker individuals living alongside each other. And when a mammal is young, it learns that if it reaches for food, that it's going to get bitten by a stronger individual. So it makes careful decisions about when it reaches and how it reaches. And so your brain is constantly comparing you to others. And if you see that you're in the one-up position, your brain releases a little bit of serotonin, even though everyone would deny that they are way too sophisticated to care about being in the one-up position, that is the natural mammalian thing to do. But the complicated thing is that the good feeling of serotonin is just for a few minutes. In nature, it's just to motivate you to go for it for that next banana. And then it's gone, which is why we're all in the same treadmill of constantly needing the next way to stimulate our happy chemicals. And can't blame this on society or the government. This is the brain that has kept your ancestors alive, and this is why you're here today. So you are constantly comparing yourself to others, and if you see them in the one-up position, then you feel one down. It's like, oh, I'm not going to get the banana, so therefore my survival is threatened. Now, how do you get out of that? One way to get out of them is negative, which is to hate them. In the interest of time, I'm just speaking colloquially. But another way of getting out of it is to feel pride in yourself.
So I want to then come back again to realistic expectations. So if we
Oh,
recognize, okay, I've got this mammal brain, even if I think I'm spiritual and evolved, I will feel triggered when I see someone in that one-up position. And
yes, but you have put them in the one-up position in your own mind.
uh-huh,
That's the point.
yes.
So you are choosing, for example, you have certain things you care about and other things you don't care about. So if someone has something in that area, you say, oh, I don't care. But then this other thing that you do care about, and then you get upset about. So how can I feel good about my own position in regard to that? And instead of viewing that person as the gatekeeper or projecting that they are looking down on you, to know that that's just a circuit built from your past experience. And I'll bet you your mother had an issue with people in that area. And that's why you're doing it. And I know my mother, and it's so funny because I'll just give you the funny example. My mother, it's often a generational thing. So oh, um, uh, it was jewelry. So my mother, looked at other people's jewelry. So my generation, we sort of sneered at that and was like, oh, we don't care about jewelry. But that constant comparing and anxiety of my mother about um, keeping score for the world, I call it. She's always keeping score and worried about who is looking down on her, that people may absorb that. And if you didn't absorb it from your mother, think about who else you might have absorbed it from.
Well, Dr. Debbie Engelman wrote in, she says, I can see why meditation is extremely important to mind, body, and spirit health. As you say, increasing our happy brain chemicals is crucial. And she says, thanks, Dr. Breuning. So I would also argue that when we do get into a meditation or mindfulness practice, we also get that bit of distance where we can recognize, okay, this is just the inner mammal going off as it is. I'm making up a story. And really, who am I? Am I really a person who needs the jewelry or the more likes on Instagram? Or am I that spiritual essence that's animating this mammalian body thing?
Yes, exactly. And one way to remember is that your old neural pathways activate easily. And when you're meditating, it's a way of stopping that. And what I call it is a neutral gear. In a car, you have forward and reverse and neutral. And I think of meditation as being like neutral, and that gives you the freedom to choose what you're going to activate next instead of just flowing into whatever circuit triggers most easily.
And with meditation, we're also creating new circuits in it
Yes,
of more peace and harmony. So let's
yes.
get practical now. In the book, The Science of Positivity, you talk about creating a positivity habit where literally 3 times a day, just for 1 minute, and over 6 weeks, you can start to really create a difference in your brain chemistry and your brain wiring. And I know you don't like to call it hacking, but that's kind of what it is. So explain to us how should we do this positivity habit practice?
So, as you said, exactly, thank you. If you can stop for 1 minute 3 times a day and focus on the positive. And people often think about gratitude, but I try to, when I speak about positivity, if you could go beyond things that happen to you by chance and also be positive about something that you did or
Right, because you say
some.
that it's better for us to think of a positive thing that's more active, not passive, as you wrote, not puppies and rainbows. So it's good
Yes.
to be
And if you want to feel
grateful.
positive about puppies and rainbows, that's fine. But the point is that by day 3, puppies and rainbows are not going to make you feel positive. And the fact of looking for positives is actually healthy. And the irony is that you are already looking for negatives. So when you start looking for positives, it will feel fake because you don't know that you're looking for negatives because that wiring is already so well established. So as you keep looking for positives, you are going to build up that wiring, and then after 6 weeks it will start feeling more natural. And an interesting thing is like to try to look for positives in your interactions with people around you who might get on your nerves, and because that's where it's needed and practical.
And so one of the other things that you mentioned in the book about the way we typically think of like a gratitude practice, we also may think about others, like we celebrate when mentally when we see something good happen to other people. But you caution us in the book that it shouldn't only be about other people. Like we need to recognize that we are important
Yes.
too, and that we need to direct some of that positivity toward ourselves.
Yes, because otherwise you end up resentful, and then you're saying, "Why am I always last?" And you then build this whole resentment circuit, and you go over it and over it, but you don't realize that you've created it yourself. And then the idea of choosing, like, I don't have to come in last. And I know it's very hard for people because these things usually get set up when you're young, and the idea that you could be having good in your life may be very threatening because you're losing whatever you got from that old mindset.
Yeah. And in fact, you say that this may require some courage. Like,
Yes.
we open this interview with talking about, well, there may be these negative people in your life, and distancing yourself from them, not entertaining their negative rhetoric, may mean that you're not going to hang out with the same people anymore. And it will require courage.
Yes, exactly. But on the other hand, at my age, I've been around so many people that I sort of know that, everybody's going to be negative. So if you're thinking that you're going to find these people who are positive for you all the time, part of that is unrealistic expectations that I want to say something and I want everybody to cheer for me. That's not really realistic. And a lot of people have given us that idea, that that person in your life should cheer for you all the time. It's just not so realistic. Um, so part of the solution to that is to first accept that it's natural to want that, but it's really a childhood circuit because in childhood you need it. But when you're older, what I do is I try to think of getting virtual support in the sense of because I'm an adult, I don't need to be supported on everything. But when I have a problem, a very specific problem, instead of believing that I could have one person that knows better than me about everything, that every time I have a problem, I'm going to think of three people that I might trust to just give me feedback on that one problem. And then I can have that feeling of being supported in a realistic way.
Hmm. I like that one. I like that piece of advice. Well, someone has written in, Chung JL says, thinking positive, remembering the feeling when I won the ping pong competition at age 12. Can I think like that? So is that a positivity thing that we could do in our habits, focusing on something in the past?
Oh, excellent question. So, first, in the book, I explain so all of your positive pathways are built from your past experience. So, you want to try to remember the experiences that built them. You can't always remember them. Now, the problem is that when you won that ping pong thing, that felt great. But if you expect to have that great feeling every minute of your life, then mm, you're going to be disappointed. So, the realistic thing is once you won that ping pong competition, the next time you practiced ping pong, you felt good about practice because you expected to win. So that's the way our brain is designed to work is when you expect a reward, then the good feeling turns on in advance.
Hmm.
So instead of expecting the feeling of finishing a marathon every minute of your life, is that it gives you the positive expectation that motivates you to take the steps to train for the marathon. So if you can use those experiences in a realistic way.
Got it. Makes sense. All right, so we do this positivity habit 3 times a day for 1 minute each time. We are going to focus on something that is relevant to us, preferably something that we've been actively engaged in. And we
Mhm.
do that for a total of 6 weeks. And what is it we're effectively doing?
So you're actually building connections between neurons that allows that electricity in your brain to flow there more easily. Without a pathway, the electricity is so hard to send along unconnected neurons that you can only do it if you stop doing everything else, which is what we call concentrating. And most of the time, like the simple example is you can drive and have a conversation at the same time because you're driving on autopilot. So we're designed to do most things on autopilot. So you want to be positive on autopilot, right? But in order to build that pathway, it's so hard that you have to stop doing other things and actually concentrate on being positive.
Got it. So it's about this attention and focus and using
Yes,
using our cortex for good. Awesome.
yes. And the simple example I always use is that your myelinated pathways are like your native language. And it's possible to learn a new language in adulthood, but it's hard. And so most people don't do it, but everyone knows the way to do it. And that's the same thing with rewiring your emotions. It's hard, but we know the way, and you can if you want to.
Yeah. So practice, practice, reinforce it. Well, this has been fun. Thank you so much for making the time to share with me and my audience here. You all can check out Loretta's information online. She's got a ton of great videos and they're very fun. She takes all the science and makes it very fun, believe me. You can also find her on YouTube. She's at the Inner, not the, but Inner Mammal Institute.org. And if you put a / in free gift, you can also get a free copy of her Taming Your Anxiety.
Not Tame Your Anxiety. It's a smaller version. It's
Oh,
called Anxiety. What turns it on? What turns it off?
got it. So there you have it, my friends.
I'm just saying that because I'm not legally allowed to give the other book away. So you know.
Understood. But it's a very helpful PDF because I think for people who feel triggered by anxiety and you like, well, I don't know what turns it off. I don't even know what turns it on. I found that free ebook was very, very helpful.
Thank you.
Well, wonderful. So, my dear friends, this ends another episode of our Conscious Evolution podcast. Be sure to stay tuned to this channel. Whether you're on Facebook or you're on YouTube, I will be back again. And if you're joining me this weekend for Stories with Soul, we will be looking at your past and your wiring so that you can take up the pen and become that responsible agent that Loretta was talking about, becoming the hero of your own life story. So remember, my dear friends, until we meet again, you are a gift to this world. So share your presence with passion. Much love.